The moon was quiet after the great battle. The ground was broken, filled with cracks from heavy fire and falling ships. Pieces of metal burned in the dust, giving off smoke that mixed with the thin air. The clash between humans and the Zarin Empire had ended only hours ago, yet the land still carried the weight of war. Rylan moved carefully through the wreckage. He was a human fighter, a soldier who had fought in many battles before, but this one felt different. The silence after the storm of war made his steps echo in his own mind. He looked around at the ruined land and felt a strange pull to keep moving forward. His armor was cracked, his left arm carried bruises, and his weapon was almost drained of power, yet his spirit refused to rest. As he walked, he saw bodies of Zarin soldiers lying among destroyed machines. The Zarin were feared across the stars. They were tall, armored in natural shells with sharp limbs that made them dangerous even without weapons. Humans had learned to fight them with advanced tools and teamwork, but many lives had been lost. Every time Rylan looked at the still forms of the Zarin, he remembered the price of this war. He told himself he was only searching the battlefield for survivors, perhaps another human who had not yet been rescued. Still, deep inside, he knew there was something else guiding him. Something unseen called him forward. Near the center of the battlefield stood the remains of a once mighty structure. It had been the throne chamber of the Zarin queen. Before the fight began, humans had learned that the queen herself was present on this moon. To defeat her was to shatter the heart of the Zarin command. The chamber had been struck by heavy fire, leaving its towers broken, walls torn apart, and the throne itself buried under tons of stone. Rylan climbed over the fallen rocks. His boots sank into the dust as he pushed aside broken shards. He did not expect to find anything alive here. The bombardment had been strong enough to bring down the whole mountain. Yet, as he moved a large stone aside, he heard something. It was faint, almost like a breath. He froze. The sound came again, soft and weak. Against all reason, against all expectation, something still lived under the wreckage. Rylan began to dig. He lifted heavy rocks one after another, his muscles screaming from the effort. He ignored the pain in his arms and the sting of broken cuts across his body. At last, after long minutes, he uncovered a large shape. It was a figure lying still, its body covered in cracks and wounds. His breath caught. It was the Zarin queen. She was taller than him even while collapsed. Her shell was once bright and shining, now darkened with burn marks and broken edges. Her wings were torn, her crown-like crest chipped. Her chest rose and fell slowly, showing that life still remained. Rylan stood over her, frozen in thought. His orders had been clear. The queen was the heart of the enemy. If she lived, the Zarin Empire would rise again to strike at humanity. To end her now would mean safety for his people. All he had to do was raise his weapon. He lifted his arm, pointing the barrel at her chest. The glow of the weapon lit her wounded form. She opened her eyes. The queen's gaze met his. Her eyes were not like human eyes. They were deep, glowing faintly in the dim light, filled with a strange strength even in weakness. She did not move. She did not beg. She only looked at him, calm and silent, as if waiting for his choice. Rylan felt his hand tremble. He had faced enemies many times before, and he had never hesitated. But here, with the queen broken before him, something inside him resisted. She was not only an enemy, she was alive. He lowered the weapon. The queen's voice was weak, almost a whisper, yet it carried a strange clarity. "Human," she said. "Why do you pause when victory is already yours?" Rylan did not answer at once. He searched for the right words, but none came easily. Finally, he spoke. "Because I see someone dying, not only an enemy. I cannot strike like this." The queen closed her eyes as if considering his words. For a long moment, there was only silence between them. Rylan felt the weight of his choice pressing down on him. He knew that if his commanders learned of this, he would be called a traitor. He knew that if she lived, humanity might suffer more battles. And yet he could not bring himself to end her life while she lay helpless. The air around them grew colder as the smoke cleared. The broken throne chamber was like a graveyard, filled with the remains of war. Rylan sat down on a stone near the queen, watching her closely. He did not know what he would do next. The queen spoke again, her words faint but steady. "Your kind fights with fire and steel, yet you show mercy." Why? Rylan shook his head. "Because mercy is not weakness. It is strength. We fight to survive, not to destroy everything." Her eyes studied him carefully. He could not tell if she believed him, but he felt that his words had reached her in some small way. Hours passed as the wreckage grew still. The battlefield outside remained quiet. The war moved elsewhere, but in this chamber, something unusual was taking shape. A human fighter and an alien queen, enemies sworn to destroy one another, now sat together in the silence of defeat. Rylan did not yet know why he had spared her. He did not yet know what this choice would mean for the future, but he felt something stir in his heart, a thought that perhaps the war was not as simple as victory and loss. Perhaps there was something greater waiting beyond the broken throne. The queen's breathing grew slower, her strength fading. Rylan looked at her and realized that if he walked away, she would die here. If he stayed, he would have to risk everything to keep her alive. His mind struggled with the weight of that decision. His body was tired, but his spirit refused to abandon her. He stood once more, looking at the cracked ceiling above, then back at her broken form. "If I walk away, you die," he said softly. "If I stay, I may die too. But I cannot turn away from life." The queen opened her eyes one more time, her gaze heavy yet filled with a strange light. She said nothing, but Rylan felt as though she had understood. And so, against all reason, against all training, the human fighter chose not to end the queen's life, but to guard it. The broken throne chamber, filled with ruins of war, now carried a fragile secret. The war had not ended. But here, in the silence of stone and smoke, the seeds of something new had been planted. Rylan sat once again by her side, his weapon across his knees, and watched the shadows grow longer. His heart was uncertain, yet his choice was made. He would risk everything, not for victory, but for something far greater. The chamber was still. Dust hung in the air, falling slowly from the cracked ceiling as if the ruins themselves were breathing. Rylan sat close to the queen, his armor scratched and his body aching, yet his eyes remained sharp. He had made his choice not to end her life, but the weight of that decision pressed harder with each passing moment. The queen was fading. Her chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm. Every breath looked like it might be her last. Yet she did not cry out or plead for help. She remained silent, her pride unbroken even in her weakness. Rylan had never seen such a thing before. In all his battles with the Zarin, he had known them to be fierce, merciless, and unwilling to show weakness. And now before him lay the very heart of their empire, broken and near death, but still carrying herself with dignity. He leaned closer, studying her wounds. Her shell was cracked in many places, and her wings were torn beyond repair. Blood, darker than any human's, had hardened in lines across her body. Rylan knew nothing of alien medicine, yet he could tell she would not last long without care. His mind raced. If he carried her out of this chamber, the first human patrol to see him would end her life and perhaps punish him as well. If he left her here, she would die slowly, and his moment of mercy would mean nothing. If he tried to heal her, he would risk being branded a traitor to his own people. It was a choice with no clear path. The queen stirred, her voice faint. "You hesitate again, human. Why remain here if your duty is to end me?" Rylan rested his weapon across his knees. "Because my duty is not only to fight. My duty is to protect life when I can, even if that life is my enemy's." Her glowing eyes studied him in silence. "At last," she said, "your people will not thank you for this. They will call you weak." "Perhaps," Rylan answered, "but strength is not in destroying the helpless. True strength is in choosing when not to kill." For the first time, the queen's gaze softened. It was not kindness, not yet, but something closer to curiosity. She tilted her head as if trying to understand the mind of the strange creature who had spared her. Time passed slowly. The chamber grew darker as the weak light from the shattered ceiling faded. Rylan knew he needed to act. He rose to his feet, scanning the wreckage for anything useful. Among the broken stones and twisted metal, he found fragments of Zarin armor, pieces of cloth, and a shattered medical kit left behind by retreating soldiers. He gathered what he could and returned to her side. He began to clean her wounds with water from his flask. The liquid hissed against her alien flesh, but she made no sound of pain. He used strips of cloth to bind the worst cracks in her shell. His hands shook at first, for he had never touched an enemy in such a way, but he pushed through the fear. The queen watched him silently. At last she spoke again. "Why risk this, human? Why waste your strength on one who has brought so much war to your kind?" Rylan stopped for a moment, meeting her gaze. "Because war is not all there is. Maybe you cannot see it now, but even enemies can choose another path. I believe in that even if no one else does. She closed her eyes as if weighing his words. You are strange, she whispered. Strange, but perhaps not foolish. Her breathing steadied slightly under his care. Ryland sat back, exhausted but relieved. He did not know how long she would survive, but at least he had given her a chance. As he rested, memories returned to him. He remembered his comrades, his friends who had fallen in battle. He remembered the orders from his commanders, the faces of those who had trusted him to bring victory. He wondered what they would say if they could see him now, tending to the queen of their enemy. His heart ached with guilt, but at the same time it burned with conviction. The night passed slowly. Ryland did not sleep. He listened to every sound in the ruins, ready for danger. His mind stayed alert, not only for threats but for the weight of his decision. At dawn, the faint light of the rising sun filtered into the chamber. The queen stirred again. Her voice was stronger than before. You kept me alive, she said. Yes, Ryland answered simply. Then you have chosen a path you cannot turn from, she told him. Your people will call for my death. My people will call for yours. By saving me, you stand against both, Ryland nodded. I know, but if we keep doing the same thing, nothing changes. Maybe this is the only way forward. The queen studied him for a long time. Finally, she said, Your people fight with courage, but they do not understand mercy as you do. You may be the first of your kind I have seen who chooses to spare an enemy. That makes you dangerous, human. Dangerous not because of your weapons, but because of your heart. Her words struck him deeply. For a moment he wondered if she spoke the truth. Perhaps compassion was more dangerous than any weapon, for it had the power to change the course of war. Outside, the sound of distant engines echoed across the broken land. Human patrols were returning to search the battlefield. Ryland knew they would come here soon. His time to decide was running out. He turned to the queen. If they find you, they will kill you. I cannot let that happen. She raised her head slightly, her voice calm. And what will you do, human? Will you hide me? Will you fight your own kind to protect me? Ryland's jaw tightened. I will do what I must. I chose to save you, and I will not turn from that choice now. For the first time, the queen gave a faint, almost invisible nod. Then your fate is tied to mine. You risk everything for a dying enemy. If you fail, your people will forget your name. If you succeed, you may change the stars. The sound of engines grew louder. Dust rose outside as patrol ships landed nearby. Ryland stood, gripping his weapon tightly. He looked down at the queen, her body still weak but her spirit unbroken. The impossible decision stood before him. He could reveal her and betray his own heart. He could end her now and undo all he had done. Or he could risk everything, standing against both armies to protect the life he had chosen to save. Ryland took a deep breath, his eyes set with resolve. I made my choice when I lowered my weapon. I will not go back. The queen's gaze locked with his. For the first time, he thought he saw respect in her eyes. The footsteps of human soldiers echoed through the ruins, drawing closer with every second. Ryland's hand tightened around his weapon and his heart beat faster. The path ahead was unclear, filled with danger and uncertainty. Yet in that moment, standing beside the dying queen, Ryland knew that the course of history might change because of the choice he had made in this broken throne chamber. He turned toward the sound of approaching soldiers, ready to face whatever came next. The sound of boots striking stone filled the broken throne chamber. Human soldiers were closing in, their voices echoing as they searched the ruins. Ryland stood over the queen, his weapon ready, his mind racing. Every choice he had made so far had brought him to this moment. The queen lay weak but alert. Her glowing eyes followed him as he moved to the doorway. They come for you, she whispered, her voice low but steady. They will not spare me. Your chance to walk away is now. Ryland shook his head. I gave you life. I will not take it back. The queen tilted her head slightly as if studying his resolve. There was no fear in her eyes, only a strange calm. She seemed almost curious about what he would do. The voices grew louder. The soldiers were only a few steps away. Ryland quickly pulled a fallen stone across the queen's body, hiding her from sight. It would not hold forever, but it might give them a chance. The soldiers entered. 3 of them stepped into the chamber, their armor shining in the dim light. Their leader raised his weapon when he saw Ryland. Ryland, the man said, you are alive. Command thought you were lost in the fight. Ryland forced a smile. I survived barely. The leader lowered his weapon, though his eyes remained sharp. We are searching for survivors and for the Queen. The last report said she was here. Have you seen anything? Ryland's heart pounded. He wanted to speak the truth, but he knew what would happen if he did. He shook his head slowly. Only ruins and wreckage. Nothing else. The soldier studied him for a long moment, as if trying to see past his words. At last he nodded. Very well. We will move on. The patrol searched the rest of the chamber but did not find the Queen. They left as quickly as they had arrived, their footsteps fading into the distance. Ryland released a long breath of relief. He turned back to the Queen and pushed the stone aside. She was still there, watching him. Her voice was faint but sharp. You lied for me. Yes, Ryland answered simply. Because ending you here would mean nothing. The war would go on. More lives would be lost. I want another way. The Queen's eyes glowed softly. You risked your life for me, a sworn enemy. I do not understand your kind. Ryland sat beside her. You do not have to understand everything. Just know that I will not let you die here. He stayed with her through the day, bringing her water, binding her wounds again, and keeping watch for more patrols. The Queen did not speak much, but when she did, her words carried weight. At one point she said, My people are proud. They do not forgive weakness. If they learn their Queen was saved by a human, they will see it as shame. Yet I wonder if shame is truly worse than death. Ryland looked at her carefully. What do you want, Queen? Do you want to live, even if it means standing against your own people? She did not answer at once. Her gaze drifted toward the broken walls of the chamber. Finally, she said, I want to see a future. Whether it is mine or theirs, I cannot say. But I know this war cannot last forever. If my survival means something greater, then perhaps I must live. Her words lit a spark inside Ryland. For the first time, he saw not just an enemy, but a leader who carried the burden of her people. She was beginning to see what he already believed, that mercy could change the stars. Night fell again and the ruins grew cold. Ryland built a small fire from broken wood and scraps of fuel. The flames gave a weak glow, casting shadows across the walls. He sat near the Queen, his weapon across his knees, watching the fire flicker. The Queen spoke suddenly. Human, what is your name, Ryland? He answered. And yours. She hesitated, then said, I am Ceres. The name carried weight, like the echo of 1,000 battles. Ryland repeated it quietly, as if sealing a bond. Ceres. For the first time, her expression softened. You speak it without fear. Few among your kind would dare. I see you as more than a title, Ryland said. You are not only a queen, you are a person, and every person deserves a chance. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. Something unspoken passed in the air, a fragile thread of trust forming between human and alien. Days passed in the ruins. Ryland cared for Ceres as best as he could, finding food and water from hidden stores left behind by the Zarin. Slowly, her strength began to return. She could sit upright now, and her voice grew stronger. With her strength came conversation. She spoke of her people, the Zarin, who had once ruled many worlds. She told him of their hunger for expansion, their endless drive for war, and how it had left their empire fractured and weary. Ryland listened carefully, and when it was his turn, he spoke of humanity. He told her of Earth, of oceans and mountains, of music and stories, of families who dreamed of peace even while war raged. Ceres listened in silence, her eyes fixed on him. When he finished, she said softly, Your people sound fragile, yet you endure. That is your strength. And yours, Ryland said, is pride. But pride alone cannot build a future. Her gaze lingered on him, thoughtful and heavy. Perhaps, she said. Perhaps you are right. On the fourth day, danger returned. Zarin warlords who had broken away from Ceres's rule landed on the moon. They came to claim the throne for themselves, believing the Queen was dead. Their ships filled the sky with shadows, and their soldiers swarmed the ruins. Ryland and Ceres watched from their hiding place. The Queen's jaw tightened as she saw her own people marching under banners of betrayal. They come for power, she said. They believe me gone, and they will fight to claim what remains. Ryland looked at her. Then we must move. If they find you, they will finish what the battle started. Ceres tried to stand, but her body was still weak. She leaned on him for support, her sharp limbs trembling. I cannot flee forever. If I am to live, I must face them. Yet I cannot do it alone. Ryland gripped his weapon firmly. You are not alone. I will stand with you. The queen's eyes met his. In that moment, something shifted between them. Enemy and soldier no longer mattered. What mattered was survival, and the fragile hope of something greater. Together, they left the broken chamber and moved into the shadows of the ruins. The night air was filled with the sound of marching soldiers and the glow of alien torches. Ryland's heart pounded, but his resolve was clear. He had chosen this path, and now he would see it through. As they walked side by side, Sarah spoke in a low voice. Human, if we live through this, the stars will remember what we have done here. Ryland nodded. Then let us give them something worth remembering. The ruins trembled under the steps of the approaching warlords. The queen and the fighter, unlikely allies bound by a choice of mercy, prepared to face the storm together. The war had not ended. But here in the shadows of broken stone, the first steps of an alliance had begun. The night was filled with the sound of marching feet and clattering weapons. The ruins of the moon shook as the Zarin warlords arrived, their soldiers spreading across the battlefield like a tide of shadow. Fires burned in the distance where landing craft had touched the ground. Their banners, black and crimson, snapped in the cold air. Ryland and Saris hid in the broken remains of a tower, watching as the enemy filled the land. The queen's breathing was steady now, her strength slowly returning, but she was still far from her full power. Ryland knew they had little time. If the warlords discovered her alive, they would end her without hesitation and claim the throne for themselves. Saris stood tall despite her injuries, her crown-shaped crest glowing faintly in the moonlight. Her eyes narrowed as she watched her own people move through the ruins. They believe me dead, she said, her voice low. If they find me alive, they will see it as a chance to prove their strength. They will not stop until I am gone. Ryland gripped his weapon tighter. Then we will not give them the chance. If they want to claim power, they will have to go through us first. The queen turned her gaze to him. You are only one soldier. They are many. You cannot stand against them alone. Ryland smiled faintly. I am not alone. You are here. Together we can fight. For a moment her expression softened. She had always seen humans as fragile creatures, but now she saw something else in Ryland, a spirit that refused to break, even when faced with impossible odds. The warlords began their march into the heart of the ruins. Their soldiers carried heavy weapons, and their voices roared like thunder as they chanted for victory. The sound shook the stones. Ryland and Saris moved quietly, taking a hidden path through the ruins until they reached the throne chamber once again. It was broken and torn, but it still carried the memory of the queen's rule. Saris touched the cracked throne with her hand, her expression filled with sorrow and anger. This was once a place of command, she said softly. Now it is a place of betrayal. Then we make it a place of strength again, Ryland answered. This is where we fight. They prepared as best they could. Ryland checked his weapon, making sure its remaining power cells would last. He gathered fallen blades and placed them nearby, ready for when his gun ran dry. Saris, though still weak, summoned the last of her strength. Her wings, though torn, shimmered faintly and her claws sharpened against the stone. The sound of approaching soldiers grew louder. The warlords had learned that the throne chamber still stood, and they marched toward it to claim their prize. Their voices echoed through the ruins, boasting of their coming victory. Ryland stood at the center of the chamber, his weapon raised. Saris stood beside him, her tall figure casting a long shadow across the broken floor. The first wave of soldiers entered. Their eyes widened when they saw her alive. One of them shouted in their harsh tongue, and the chamber filled with the clash of weapons. Ryland fired, his shots striking true. The first soldiers fell, their armored forms crashing to the ground. Saris moved with sudden speed, her claws flashing as she cut through those who came too close. Together they stood back to back, fighting as one. The battle raged within the chamber. More soldiers poured in, their numbers overwhelming. Ryland moved with precision, firing until his weapon hissed with heat, then switching to the blades he had gathered. He fought with every ounce of strength, his breath sharp, his body burning with effort. Saris fought like a storm. Even weakened, her power was terrifying. Her wings spread wide, striking her enemies aside while her claws tore through armor. Her voice rose above the noise, a cry that echoed like thunder, reminding her people that their queen still lived. But the enemy did not falter. Wave after wave came, their numbers endless. Ryland's arm grew heavy, his armor cracked, and his body bled from cuts and bruises. Yet he did not fall. Every time he thought he could not rise again, he looked at Cirrus and found new strength. The warlords themselves entered at last. 3 of them, tall and fierce, clad in dark armor that glowed with energy. They carried weapons of immense power, and their eyes burned with ambition. One stepped forward, pointing at Cirrus. "You are weak," he shouted. "Your rule is over. The Zarin will belong to us now." Cirrus raised her head high, her voice strong. "I am still queen. I will not bow to traitors." The warlords charged. The chamber shook as their weapons struck. Rylan moved to block one, his blade clashing against the warlord's weapon in a shower of sparks. Cirrus faced the other 2, her claws meeting their blades with fierce strength. The fight was brutal. Rylan struggled against the warlord's power, his arms trembling with each strike. His blade cracked, and the force of the blows pushed him to his knees. But he refused to fall. With a roar, he drove his weapon upward, piercing the warlord's chest. The alien staggered, then collapsed. Across the chamber, Cirrus battled the other 2. Her strength was failing, her body covered in wounds, but her spirit blazed brighter than ever. Rylan, gasping for breath, rushed to her side. Together, they struck in unison. Cirrus's claws tore through one warlord, while Rylan's blade cut down the other. Silence fell at last. The chamber was filled with bodies, the floor stained with the marks of battle. The fires outside burned low, and the enemy soldiers, seeing their leaders fall, began to retreat into the night. Rylan stood, his chest heaving, his body trembling from exhaustion. His armor was broken, his blade cracked, but his spirit remained unbroken. He looked at Cirrus, who stood tall despite her wounds. Her crown glowed faintly, her eyes shining with fierce light. She turned to him, her voice soft but filled with strength. "You fought beside me when no one else would. You risked everything for an enemy. Tell me, human, why?" Rylan met her gaze. "Because you were more than my enemy. You are life, and life deserves to be protected." For a moment the queen was silent. Then she lowered her head, a gesture of respect. "Then you are no longer only human. You are my ally. Together we will build something greater than war." The fires of the battlefield glowed around them, but within the broken throne chamber, something new had been born. Not victory, not defeat, but alliance. Rylan looked at Cirrus, and she looked at him. Both knew that the war was not yet over, but the path ahead had changed. What had begun with mercy had now become a bond sealed in battle. And as the first light of dawn touched the ruins, the human fighter and the alien queen stood side by side, ready to face the future together. The broken throne chamber was quiet after the battle. Smoke drifted through the air, carrying the sharp scent of burned stone and metal. Bodies of fallen soldiers lay across the floor, both Zarin and human alike, their weapons scattered in silence. The fires outside had dimmed, leaving only faint light that mixed with the pale dawn rising above the ruined moon. Rylan leaned against a cracked pillar, his chest heaving from exhaustion. His armor was broken, his body covered in bruises and cuts, yet he still stood. His weapon, dented and nearly destroyed, rested loosely in his hand. He looked at Cirrus, who stood tall despite her wounds, her crown-shaped crest shining faintly in the early light. She had survived. Against betrayal, against death, against the overwhelming tide of her enemies, she still lived. And she had not stood alone. A human soldier, once her sworn enemy, had fought at her side. Cirrus turned her gaze to Rylan. Her voice was steady, though her body trembled. "You stood with me when my own people turned against me. You fought when you could have walked away. That choice has changed everything." Rylan forced a tired smile. "I made my choice when I spared you. Every step since then only followed that path." The queen studied him for a long moment. Her glowing eyes softened, and for the first time she allowed a trace of warmth in her voice. "You are not like others of your kind. You see what many cannot. That is why we live today." Rylan looked out at the battlefield where the retreating soldiers of the warlords vanished into the distance. "They will return," he said. "Others will come." "This fight is not the last," Cirrus nodded. "Yes, but their defeat here will echo. Word will spread that the queen still lives and that she rose with the aid of a human. My enemies will fear that story, for it speaks of something greater than war. It speaks of change." For a moment both were silent, listening to the wind move through the ruins. It carried with it the memory of the battle, but also the whisper of something new. Rylan pushed himself upright and walked to the center of the chamber. He looked at the broken throne, cracked and covered in dust. It was a symbol of power that had once ruled through fear and conquest. Now it stood as a reminder of the cost of pride and endless war. "This throne is broken," Rylan said quietly. "Perhaps it is better this way. Power built only on fear cannot last." Sarah stepped beside him, her tall form casting a long shadow. "You are right. This throne was once the heart of my rule, but it is now the mark of my weakness. If I rebuild, it cannot be as it was. It must be different." She turned to him, her eyes glowing with new determination. "Human, you gave me life when all was lost. You stood beside me when the stars themselves seemed to fall. If I am to shape a new rule, it must be with your kind, not against them." Rylan's heart tightened at her words. The thought of a true alliance between humans and Zarin had once been impossible, a dream beyond belief. Yet here in the ruins of war, that dream had taken its first step. "Then let us build it together," he said. Saris raised her head high, her voice strong despite her wounds. "Yes, together, but it will not be easy. My people will resist. Your people will doubt. Both sides will see this bond as betrayal. We must stand against both, not with weapons alone, but with proof that unity is stronger than war." Rylan nodded firmly. "Then we will show them. We will show them through action, not words. They will see what we have done here, and they will understand." For several days, Rylan and Saris remained in the ruins, gathering what supplies they could and tending to their wounds. They spoke often during that time, not only of battle but of their peoples. Rylan told stories of Earth, of simple lives untouched by war, of children running along green fields and oceans that stretched farther than the eye could see. Saris listened with quiet wonder, as if hearing such tales for the first time. In return, she shared the history of the Zarin, of their rise from harsh worlds, their hunger to expand, and the endless battles that had shaped them. At night, when the fires burned low, they would sit near the broken throne and speak of the future. Saris would ask, "What does peace mean to humans?" And Rylan would answer, "It means living without fear, building without destruction, dreaming without chains." He would then ask her, "What does strength mean to the Zarin?" And she would answer, "It means survival, endurance, the will to stand even when all else has fallen." In those talks, they found not division, but a bridge. On the 5th day, Sarah stood tall, her wounds healing, her body regaining power. Her wings shimmered faintly again, no longer torn as before. Rylan could see the queen returning, but she was no longer the same ruler who had once commanded armies without question. She was something new. "We cannot stay here," she said firmly. "The warlords will regroup. Your people will return. If we are to build a future, we must go beyond this moon." Rylan agreed. "Then let us leave." "Where will we go?" "To a place where both our peoples will hear us," she answered. "To the center of the conflict. There they will see with their own eyes that human and Zarin stand as one." They prepared for the journey. Rylan repaired what remained of his armor and gathered weapons from the fallen. Saris summoned what strength her people still loyal to her could offer, calling a small hidden ship that had been waiting in the shadows. When it arrived, its dark form gliding silently across the ruined field, Rylan and Saris boarded together. The ship rose into the sky, leaving behind the broken throne chamber. As they looked down one last time, Rylan felt a strange weight lift from his heart. That place had been the site of war, but it had also been the birthplace of something greater. Days later, the ship reached the front lines of the conflict, where human fleets and Zarin armadas faced each other across the stars. Tension filled the void of space, each side waiting for the other to strike. When Saris's ship entered the battlefield, weapons turned toward it from both sides. Rylan and Saris stood together at the front of the vessel. Their message was simple. The queen lived, and she had chosen a new path. She declared that war would not continue, not through conquest, not through destruction, but through alliance. She told her people that strength was not only in fighting, but in building something new. Rylan spoke to his own commanders, telling them that humanity's greatest victory was not in defeating enemies, but in turning them into allies. At first, there was disbelief. Anger rose from both sides. Many shouted that this was a trick, that the words of enemies could not be trusted. But others listened. They saw the human soldier who had fought fiercely now standing beside the alien queen, who had once ruled against them. They saw not weakness but courage in that bond. Whispers spread across both fleets. Doubt turned to thought, and thought turned to possibility. The war did not end in an instant, but in that moment, the first spark of peace was lit. In the days that followed, small groups of humans and Zarin began to meet, first in secret, then in the open. They spoke of trade, of shared defense, of worlds that could be rebuilt together. It was fragile, uncertain, and filled with challenges. But it was real. Rylan and Saris remained at the center of it. They were the proof that even sworn enemies could find trust. Together they traveled to worlds broken by war, showing both peoples that hope was stronger than fear. And as months turned into years, the story of the human fighter and the alien queen spread across the stars. It was told not as a tale of victory through battle, but of victory through mercy. It became a story that children of both species would hear. A story that reminded them that the greatest strength was not in conquest, but in unity. On the anniversary of the battle, Rylan and Saris stood once more on the moon where it had all begun. The ruins of the throne chamber still stood, but now they were no longer a symbol of war. Around them, humans and Zarin worked together, building something new upon the broken stones. Saris turned to Rylan, her voice steady and strong. "This place was once the heart of destruction. Now it will be the heart of peace," Rylan smiled. And it began with one choice, a choice to spare life instead of taking it. They stood together watching as builders raised new structures from the ruins. The air carried the sound of hammers, voices, and laughter, not weapons. The throne was gone, but in its place, something far greater had risen. A new dawn had begun, and it would carry both humans and Zarin into a future shaped not by fear, but by hope. And so the human fighter and the alien queen walked forward, side by side into the light of a new era,